rain made a varnish of Hanover Square and turned every carriage lamp into a trembling smear of gold, and Caroline O'Brien stood in that wet shine, with another woman's weight cutting a line across her forearms. Lady O'Brien's cloak was sable at the collar and heavy with beadwork at the hem. Jewelled clasps, cold as coins against Caroline's skin, and she held it away from the puddles, while sleet stung through the torn thumb of her glove and settled under the thin seams of her pelisse. Water licked her ankles where the cloth had soaked through. Her stockings clung. Her right cheek still burned in a neat hot oval, sharper than the wind, because Lady O'Brien had struck her on the carriage step not 20 minutes earlier, when Caroline answered a question one breath too slowly before Lord and Lady Penrith. No one had protested. One gentleman had looked down at his watch-chain. A footman had looked beyond her shoulder. The coachman had adjusted the reins. Inside the opera house doors, where warmth leaked in ribbons each time they opened, the orchestra tested a rising figure of violins, and then broke apart into tuning notes, refined and private and forbidden. Caroline heard every bright thread of it while she stood in rain like hired furniture, visible only as long as someone needed another hand. At 21 she had already learned how humiliation moved through a room. It had a scent first, rosewater and powder and silk, warmed by lamplight. Then came the rustle, the pause, the turn of eyes that slid over her and did not stop. Lady O'Brien used that current with discipline. Ticket line, now. Find my vinaigrette. Tell Mr. Kells we are expected in Lady Hartwell's corridor, not the common stair. Do not speak unless addressed. Each order was delivered without raising the voice. Each order was given where strangers could hear. Caroline crossed wet stone, then polished marble, then wet stone again, carrying gloves, reticule, fan, a folded shawl, a parcel of sugared almonds that she would not taste, then the cloak, again when the vestibule grew too crowded for Lady O'Brien's patience. By 7:30 the damp had crept from her hem to her knees, and hunger had become less a pang than a hollow pressure that made her spine feel light and brittle. She had eaten bread crust at noon in the back passage, and nothing since. One of the younger footmen brushed by with a tray of glasses, the scent of claret sweet and sharp under her nose, and he did not look at her face, only at the aisle she obstructed. A woman in emerald satin glanced once at Caroline's mended cuff, and then lifted her skirt as if mud might leap from Caroline's shoes to the silk. Plain, they called her, when calling her anything at all. Plain as a nail, plain as a ledger line. Yet, whenever fatigue made her forget, and she raised her head directly, men blinked and women looked twice, and Lady O'Brien noticed both. That was why the worn colours never changed. Brown in winter, brown in spring, washed to weak tea in summer, and mended darker each season. No ribbons, no lace left intact longer than a week before being taken for one of the sisters' gowns. Dark hair pinned hard and flat, then pinned again. Caroline had inherited her father's black hair and her mother's eyes, large and grave and impossible to disguise except by lowering them. She had inherited her father's face as well, fine-boned and pale, the narrow bridge of nose that made her look stern when she was only tired. Lady O'Brien called that face ungrateful. The sisters, Miss Julia and Miss Anne, called it ecclesiastical, and laughed when guests joined them. Tonight Julia had paused at the top of the opera stairs, velvet mantle floating behind her, and said in a tone of affectionate pity, "Our poor relation is useful in weather, mamma. She can hold all things and feel nothing." Laughter followed, light and effortless and social. Caroline had inclined her head as if the words were sensible. The cheek that had been struck pulsed once, then steadied. She did not weep. She had been taught too well what tears purchased in that household, derision if private, punishment if witnessed. She moved because she was ordered. She listened because she had to survive. She counted because counting gave shape to the night. 5 times to the carriage, 3 times to the vestibule desk, twice to the side corridor where a clerk with ink-stained cuffs stamped cards and never met her eye. The inventory of how she had come here sat in her body like iron. Her father had died in late autumn, coughing blood onto linen that cost more than they could afford, and even while fever took him, he had made her decline Armo and pass Blackstone by candlelight, one hand on the page, one hand shaking in hers. "Words are walls," he had whispered when the house had gone quiet and debts had already begun to tap at the door. "Learn where the doors are hidden." Her mother had followed in spring, fever fast and merciless. Then came Lady O'Brien with marriage lines still fresh and a talent for sympathy in public, and 6 months later probate opened like a trap, debts hidden beneath debt, notes rolled into other notes. The townhouse entailed to a distant male cousin no one had seen in years, silver sold, paintings gone by increments, Caroline's room reassigned to Julia because the light was better for complexion. Her books moved to trunks, then to auction. Save for a few she smuggled out one at a time beneath laundry sheets. Last came the social death, tidier than any burial. She ceased to be Miss Caroline O'Brien in drawing rooms and became our poor relation, a phrase dropped with a smile whenever lineage or dowry entered conversation. She carried that phrase as she carried the cloak, as weight and as evidence. Under her bodice, warm only where her skin touched it, lay her single private possession, a slim notebook bound in cracked calf, pages filled in a careful hand with copied legal passages, fragments of poetry, and names of statutes her father had made her memorize. She checked for it by pressure alone, 2 fingers at the seam each hour, never in view of others. The notebook did not feed her. It did not shelter her. It reminded her that language could still belong to her. When the first interval ended and the bell sounded, Lady O'Brien turned in the corridor with silk whispering around her and rosewater rising from her sleeves. The sisters glittered on either side, white gloves perfect, cheeks bright with heat from the crowded salon. Caroline stood with the cloak folded over one arm and her own wet gloves hidden in the shadow of it. "You will remain here until the final curtain," Lady O'Brien said, not loudly because true humiliation required no volume. "Do not attempt to enter. Do not attach yourself to any acquaintance. When we depart, you will walk home. You will learn economy, if not grace." Julia's smile sharpened. Anne adjusted one pearl earring as if bored by the scene. A pair of gentlemen near the column pretended sudden fascination with a playbill. Caroline inclined her head once. "Yes, Lady O'Brien." The response came smooth, almost gentle, and that gentleness was labour too, chosen and costly. She stepped back as they swept past toward their box, cloak reclaimed at the last instant with a tug that nearly took her balance. The corridor settled into movement around her. Doors opened and closed. Perfume and wet wool and candle smoke mingled with the resin scent of violin bows. The marble under her soles bled cold upward through thin leather. She placed her hands one over the other to hide the split seams. She felt her stomach fold inward again, slow and tight, and let it. By the time the second act began, rain struck the tall windows in hard, slanting lines, and Caroline had become part of the architecture at the edge of the mirrored hall, a quiet figure in faded cloth no one thought to name. She fetched a dropped handkerchief for a dowager who did not thank her. She gave directions to a confused provincial couple, and was ignored when they found a better-dressed guide. She carried a message to the porter and stood aside while 2 late arrivals brushed her shoulder with deliberate carelessness. Each small slight landed and was stored, not as wound alone, as measure. Lady O'Brien believed obedience emptied a person. Caroline had discovered the reverse. Obedience, when chosen for an hour, could conceal observation. Observation could become memory. Memory, properly arranged, could become proof. She watched who spoke with whom, which clerk accepted packets without signatures, which corridor remained unlit after the bells, which gentleman's ring bore a broker's seal she recognised from old papers at her father's desk. She stood very still while the house shone around her, and in that stillness she began, line by line, to map the shape of the power that had dispossessed her. When the final bell for the act sounded and the audience flowed back toward velvet and light, Caroline remained where she had been placed, cold to the bone and wholly awake. When the crowd thinned for a moment and the mirrors gave her back her own narrow reflection, Caroline saw not one woman but several versions of herself, layered like bad glass, one in soaked brown cloth under gaslight, and one at 16 in morning black beside a sickbed, one at 18 carrying account ledgers she had no legal right to open, one at 21 standing in plain sight where no one would claim her. Her father had once told her that memory was not a ribbon laid flat, but a knot pulled tighter each time the hand returned to it, and tonight every pull tightened. The scent of beeswax from the opera sconces brought back the sour sweetness of tallow and medicine from his chamber in that final autumn, the rasp in his breath, the wet on the linen, the stubborn way he still corrected her translation when she stumbled over a clause. He had not died gently. He had died arguing with the law, with his own body, with God perhaps, refusing to surrender a sentence unfinished. "Read it again," he had whispered, lips gone white, tapping the margin where property passed through male hands, as if women were weather. "Read every word they would use against you." She had read until dawn, while rain struck the shutters, and the physician shook his head in the hall, and when her father could no longer answer, she read anyway, because stopping felt like consent. By the 2nd week after burial, the condolence cards had ceased. By the 3rd, the creditors had begun to call in person. And by the 4th, Lady O'Brien had moved her own writing desk into his study as if widowhood itself conveyed title. Caroline remembered the first evening she saw her there, silk bright against dark oak, her father's ledger open under another woman's hand, and understood with a clarity that made her teeth ache that grief did not suspend appetite in polite households. It sharpened it. The house still smelled of morning crepe and lavender sachet, yet lists had already been drafted. Which paintings could be sold quietly? Which servants could be dismissed without references? Which rooms were too warm to leave to a girl who no longer had prospects? Lady O'Brien had spoken of necessity in a voice of polished sorrow. "We must be practical, my dear." Practical meant the silver left first. Practical meant the pianoforte was moved before breakfast and returned only in stories. Practical meant the cook's niece took Caroline's old place by the fire, while Caroline learned to eat standing in passages so the drawing-room might appear less crowded when callers arrived. Every concession came wrapped as prudence. Every theft came framed as management. And because Caroline was young and female and not named executor, she could watch and memorize and sign nothing. A gust slipped through the side doors and needled the damp through her skirts. And with that cold came the memory of spring fever, her mother's last week, the room too bright and too silent because everyone feared the sound of coughing. Her mother had been quick to laughter in life and almost unrecognizable in dying, cheeks hollow, hair damp against her temples, fingers plucking at the coverlet as if searching for dropped thread. Caroline had sat with vinegar cloths and prayer books and useless hope, and when the fever broke at dawn by taking everything with it, the house entered its first long mourning, with only her father and Caroline to keep it. Lady O'Brien was not yet in their lives. Years later, after her father remarried, Lady O'Brien wept publicly, sincerely perhaps, and accepted embraces in the front parlour where mirrors doubled every gesture. In private, she reorganised. Caroline learned that compassion and conquest could share a face. By June, the seamstress measured Julia for new summer muslin and measured Anne for riding habits, while Caroline's black dresses were turned and re-hemmed until the fabric shone at the elbows. By August, the sisters referred to her room as theirs and her old things as clutter. By September, Julia's maid carried Caroline's books into trunks because young ladies do not require statutes to mend manners, and by October the trunks were gone. She found one of her father's volumes in a bookseller's stall off Holborn, his initials still on the flyleaf, and stood with it in her hands while the seller named a price she could not pay. She had put it back without argument and walked 3 streets before she allowed herself to feel the loss. That was how Lady O'Brien trained the household. No scenes, no raised voices beyond what could be called correction. Cruelty in measured doses, always deniable, always witnessed by someone ready to call it discipline. A breakfast tray that arrived to everyone but Caroline when guests were present and could not be troubled by awkward economies. A summons rung from the drawing-room exactly when she sat to copy pages from memory, so that she must choose between obedience and the only work that steadied her mind. Introductions made with smiling precision. Miss Caroline, our relation from the Irish branch, unfortunate in fortune but very useful. Laughter followed. Sympathy followed the laughter. No one asked how an unfortunate relation came to bear the same surname as the mistress of the house. No one asked why her gloves were mended at the fingers while Julia wore fresh kid every fortnight. Caroline learned to answer to girl from tradesmen who once called her miss. She learned to carry herself through rooms where men discussed settlements over her shoulder as if she were furniture with ears. She learned that silence was read as stupidity, unless it was perfectly timed, and she learned to time it like a skill. On nights when the house finally slept, she lit half a candle and copied legal forms into the cracked notebook hidden in her bodice now, each phrase a narrow plank over deep water, consideration, witness, undue influence, instrument void. She copied poems too when the law turned her blood to ice, because language that was not a weapon still had to exist somewhere. The orchestra inside rose into a passage she recognized from practice years ago, and the old ache of erased music moved through her ribs with the old ache of erased names. Her father had paid for 6 months of lessons once, only 6 before debts swallowed lessons and candles, and then the teacher herself. He had apologized as if poverty were a moral failing. Caroline had not blamed him then, and did not blame him now. She blamed the men who smiled while extending credit at ruinous rates, the brokers with ink-black rings and courteous bows, the legal machinery that turned one bad season into a chain around a daughter's throat. After probate, she had found the first of those papers by accident, folded into a dispatch case in the study, interest upon interest attached to her father's signature, and then to Lady O'Brien's, names of guarantors she had seen at dinner, numbers that climbed as if the page itself were fevered. She had not stolen the papers. She had copied them and replaced them before dawn. In November of that year, when rain came early and coal was dear, she had seen the same broker's crest on a calling card left in the hall, and understood that old debt had become a profession in that house. Lady O'Brien insisted they were preserving respectability. Respectability required appearances. Appearances required Julia's velvet, Anne's pearls, flowers in season, carriage hire paid promptly, opera boxes taken even in lean months. Economy, in Lady O'Brien's doctrine, began and ended with Caroline. If fires burned low in certain bedchambers, hers was first to cool. If a maid must be dismissed, Caroline took the laundry list. If the butcher's bill ran high, Caroline's portion shrank. Hunger became a fact, then a habit, then a kind of clock by which she could tell the hour without looking. By January she knew exactly when weakness would strike behind her knees. By February she carried sugar wrapped in paper when she could get it, and felt ashamed of needing it. By March she stopped feeling ashamed and called it strategy. The sisters noticed only that her face grew thinner and called her severe. Lady O'Brien noticed that men still glanced when Caroline forgot to look down and tightened the rules. No bright colours, no standing near windows at parties, no speaking to gentlemen except in answer and never at length, no mention of education, no quotation, no display of memory. Caroline was to be useful, not legible, yet legibility has a way of surviving suppression. Old Mr. Finch, once her father's clerk and now half retired to a back office near Chancery Lane, had pressed a packet into her hand one wet morning when she delivered a note for Lady O'Brien. "Your father trusted your head," he had murmured without meeting her eyes. Inside she found copied extracts of trust language and one warning written in cramped script: "Keep witnesses." She had hidden that scrap under the notebook cover where it remained now, soft at the folds from being read in darkness. 3 days passed after she received it before Lady O'Brien began speaking, in Caroline's hearing, of advantageous matches that could solve many difficulties at once. She did not name a suitor. She named figures. A cluster of patrons swept past, laughter edged with wine, and one gentleman's shoulder struck Caroline hard enough to jolt the ache in her cheek. He did not apologize. He glanced once, saw brown cloth, and moved on. She steadied without a sound. That, too, had become practice. She had been struck in private and in public, with words more often than hands, but the hand had come more frequently this winter when accounts tightened and temper shortened. Lady O'Brien preferred the cheek because marks faded under powder and propriety could call it correction. Once, in front of a milliner, she had caught Caroline by the wrist and squeezed until the bones ground because Caroline had asked whether a bill had already been paid. Once, in the carriage, she had pinched the soft skin at Caroline's upper arm until tears stung, and then smiled at the passing crowd as if nothing had occurred. Julia copied the manner in miniature. Anne copied the contempt. Between them, they took room, breath, and narrative. They wore Caroline's mother's cameo and called it family property. They used Caroline's Christian name only when issuing requests no servant could refuse. They rehearsed their kindness before company and rehearsed her humiliation between calls. Caroline had stopped expecting rescue from decency in others. She trusted paper, dates, signatures, and her own memory. She trusted the notebook under her bodice, pages growing crowded with statutes and lines from poems her mother loved, and practical notations about who visited when and with what seal. She trusted Mrs. Davies in the kitchen, who slid her crusts wrapped in clean linen when she could, and never asked questions she could not safely hear answered. She trusted the old house clock to strike even when no one listened. Tonight she trusted only what she could see in this corridor: Lady O'Brien's carriage crest on the servant door card, the Penrith's footman speaking in low tones with a clerk near the side stair, a familiar broker's signet flashing once in a mirror before vanishing into the crowd, and her own hands, chapped and split and steady despite the cold. Inside, applause broke like distant surf, rose, and fell. Outside, rain kept time against the glass. Caroline remained where she had been ordered to remain, every old loss pressing close as damp cloth, every old lesson awake inside her. And when the bell for the next interval began to ring, she lifted her head at last, and listened for the first step that did not belong to her past. It came from behind her left shoulder, close enough that the heat of breath touched the damp hair at her nape. "You dropped this." A pearl-grey glove entered her sight as if produced by the mirror itself, immaculate kid leather against the rain-dark blur of coats and jewels. Caroline's own hands were in front of her, one folded over the other at her waist. Both gloves split at the fingertips so that her chilled skin showed through. She did not move. The corridor noise narrowed to the small, hard pulse in her ears and the distant roll of strings beginning again behind the closed doors. Then she turned her head by degrees, not enough to seem abrupt, and saw the man who held the glove between two bare, steady fingers, as though he offered a dance card and not a warning. Everyone in London knew the Earl of Ashcombe by outline before name, tall enough to look levelly over most men in crowded rooms, shoulders cut broad through black evening cloth, dark hair worn without softness, a white scar running from under his left ear to the angle of his jaw, pale and straight as if drawn with a blade. His face seemed carved rather than formed, all edges and control, and his eyes in the gaslight were the colour of storm water at dusk. He did not look at her first. He looked past her into the mirror opposite, where Lady O'Brien stood half a corridor away in rose silk, accepting a sealed packet from a gentleman Caroline recognised with sick precision. Mr. Vane, gaming broker, ring with a boar crest in black enamel. The same crest pressed into old debt papers she had copied by half candle in winter. The Earl shifted the glove a fraction closer. "Take it!" His voice was low enough to vanish beneath the rustle of passing skirts. Caroline kept her chin level. "It is not mine, my lord." "Now." Her throat tightened once. She let the breath out through her nose and did not lift her hand. In the mirror, Lady O'Brien tucked the packet into her reticule without looking down, then touched Mr. Vane's sleeve with two fingers, and turned her body towards the side corridor that led to the lesser stair and the servant exit, where carriages waited without names displayed. Julia and Anne were not with her. No companion stood at her elbow. No matron watched. The movement was too deliberate to be chance. Caroline said very softly, "You mistake me for someone else." At that, his gaze finally came to her, full and direct, not admiring, not even curious, assessing quick and hard and complete, from wet hem to bruised cheek to bare fingertips, pushing through mended seams. Something in his expression altered by less than an inch. He took one step that placed his body between her and the mirror line. His arm remained lowered, the glove still offered as if etiquette required patience. "Stand still," he said. "Do not turn. Take the glove." The command dropped through her like cold iron. She obeyed on the third beat, not because he had ordered it, but because Lady O'Brien had begun to walk. Caroline felt it before she saw it, the familiar rustle and scent moving nearer through the crowd. She took the glove. The leather was warm from his hand and heavier than it should have been. The Earl's fingers closed briefly over hers as he released it, one pressure, deliberate, and gone. "Open it," he said. She bent her head as if inspecting the stitching. The glove mouth was folded inward. She slipped one finger inside and touched metal first, a ring, broad and engraved. Her lungs forgot their task. She drew it into her palm under cover of her sleeve. Gold, worn at one edge, O'Brien crest quartered with the old knotwork her father used on his letters. His signet ring, lost since the week after probate, when Lady O'Brien had announced, with sorrow arranged perfectly on her features, that thieves had come through the scullery entrance. Beneath the ring lay a narrow strip of folded paper. She hooked it out with her nail and shielded it with both hands, as if adjusting a torn seam. 5 words, written in a hand she did not know, blunt and unadorned. "Your consent will be forged before midnight unless witnessed." For one instant the corridor tilted. She saw not marble and mirrors, but parchment, signatures, witness lines, names inserted where bodies had not stood. She saw a licence sealed in haste. She saw herself carried from one carriage to another and told afterward that she had agreed. Shame was manageable. Erasure was not. The Earl spoke without moving his lips more than necessary. "Do not look alarmed." "You carry my father's seal," she answered, matching his quiet. "That is an alarming habit, my lord." His mouth shifted. Not quite a smile. "You may decide whether to thank me when we are done." By the time the second interval bell finished its final stroke, Lady O'Brien had crossed half the distance and was angling toward Caroline with bright impatience already arranged for public viewing. The Earl's eyes flicked once toward the side stair and returned. "She means to remove you now," he said. "There are 2 men by that door prepared to attest anything paid for. If you leave this floor unwitnessed, you will not return as yourself." Caroline closed her hand over the ring until the edges bit her skin. "How do you know this?" "I read faster than Mr. Vane bargains." "Why involve yourself?" His jaw tightened against the old scar. "Because fraud conducted in my sight becomes my affair." Lady O'Brien was 10 paces away. Caroline could hear the beads at her mother-of-pearl reticule click against one another with each step. She could smell rose-water cutting through wax and wet wool. She folded the paper into her bodice in one practised motion and slid the ring after it. The glove she kept visible, draped over her fingers. If anyone looked, she was only a poor relation receiving a discarded trifle. "Caroline!" Lady O'Brien called, sweet enough for strangers. "There you are. We are leaving at once." The Earl's voice did not rise. "You have 1 hour of safety if you take it." Lady O'Brien reached them and performed surprise with artistry. "Lord Ashcombe! What an honour! I did not see you arrive." "You were occupied," he said. Her eyes dropped to the pearl-grey glove in Caroline's hand and sharpened, then softened immediately. "Child, do not loiter. Give that back if it is not yours." Caroline looked at her stepmother and understood, with a clarity that frightened even her, that she had been standing for years on a narrow threshold and had just felt the hinge move underfoot. If she followed now, she would have vanished into paper. If she resisted openly without shield, Lady O'Brien would call it hysteria and have her carried home. If she chose visibility in the wrong company, scandal would bury her before law could rescue. The corridor hummed around them. No one truly listened. Everyone watched. The Earl spoke to Lady O'Brien as if discussing weather. "Miss O'Brien misplaced a glove. I am returning it." "How kind!" Lady O'Brien smiled without showing teeth. "She is forever careless," Caroline answered before caution could silence her. "I have never misplaced what was mine." The words landed between them like dropped glass. Lady O'Brien's gaze flashed warning, quick and private. The Earl watched that flash and turned his shoulders a degree enough to close the space beside Caroline's arm. "She will attend the remainder from my box," he said. Lady O'Brien gave a soft laugh, brittle at the edges. "You are most generous, my lord, but my stepdaughter's company is not suitable for distinguished guests. She is apt to be overwhelmed." "She will stand quietly," he replied. "Can your witnesses do the same?" Colour drained from Lady O'Brien's painted mouth, and then returned in a thin line. "I do not understand you." "That is convenient for the moment." Caroline felt the corridor narrow further, as if all exits had moved. She had never stood in direct conflict between titled power and domestic power, with her own name as the object contested aloud. The instinct to placate rose first, old and trained. The newer instinct rose behind it, harder. Lady O'Brien extended her hand palm up, command disguised as invitation. "Come, the carriage waits." The Earl did not look at Caroline when he spoke. "Choose." She stared at Lady O'Brien's hand. The same hand that had straightened her collar before guests. The same hand that had struck her cheek at the curb. The same hand that would sign for her if given corridor shadows and an unwitnessed door. Behind Lady O'Brien, beyond polished shoulders and jewelled throats, Caroline saw Mr. Vane at the side stair speaking to two thick-set men in dark coats. One held a folded ledger, the other held nothing and watched too steadily. "What choice?" Lady O'Brien demanded, still smiling at nearby patrons who pretended not to hear. The Earl answered for Caroline, each word clipped to bone. "Return with her now and trust her arrangements, or step into my box for 1 hour under my name and in full view of this house." Lady O'Brien's fan snapped open like a white threat. "My lord, this is grotesque. You have no claim." "Not yet," he said. Caroline lifted her head. "If I enter your box, I enter as myself. Yes. You will not speak for me unless I ask it." A pause. Rain beat harder against the high panes. Inside the auditorium, a soprano climbed toward a held note that seemed to stretch the air thin. "I will not," he said. Lady O'Brien took one half-step forward and lowered her voice. "Do not be absurd, Caroline. You are tired. You are cold. Come home." Home. The word had not fit that house for years. Caroline's fingers closed around the borrowed glove until the kid leather creased. She could feel the folded warning against her skin, the hard circle of her father's ring beneath it, the old lessons rousing with a violence that was almost relief. "Keep witnesses," Mr. Finch had written. "Read every word they would use against you," her father had whispered. The Earl's presence did not feel safe. It felt dangerous in a different direction, bright and public and irreversible. But danger with witnesses was law's beginning. Lady O'Brien's smile thinned to a line invisible to everyone but Caroline. "If you shame this family for attention, you will regret it," Caroline answered in the same quiet register. "I have carried this family's shame for 3 years. It did not fit." Then she turned to the Earl. 1 hour, my lord." He offered his arm, formal as any ballroom courtesy, and for the first time his voice held something not cold but adamant. "Stay where you can be seen." She placed her hand on his sleeve. The cloth was dry, fine, and warm from his body heat. She did not look back at Lady O'Brien as they moved, because looking back would acknowledge ownership. They crossed the mirrored corridor in measured steps, while strangers shifted to make room, curiosity pricking through decorum like needles through silk. At the turn toward the private boxes, Caroline risked one glance over her shoulder. Lady O'Brien stood motionless beside the marble column, fan half raised, rosewater and fury held behind a perfect social mask. Mr. Vane had gone from the side stair. The footman at Ashcombe's door bowed too quickly when he saw who approached, then looked at Caroline and looked away. Inside, light pooled soft on crimson upholstery and gilt rails, and the stage opened below like a painted wound of colour and sound. The Earl released her hand at once and shut the door with a single decisive click that sounded to Caroline less like enclosure than record. Witness, presence, time marked. He remained by the door, tall and still, as if guarding an entry point no one else could yet see. "You are in danger of a forced instrument," he said. Do you understand me? She faced him, breath shallow but steady. I understand the instrument. I need the names. His eyes sharpened, storm over iron. Good. Outside the box, in the corridor she could no longer see. Silk rustled and plans began to break. Caroline did not ask how he had obtained her father's ring. She did not ask whom he had bribed, threatened, or outplayed in the corridors below. Questions could wait. Paper could not. Then we begin with ink, she said. The Earl's gaze held hers for one measured beat, as if revising an expectation he had arrived with. He crossed to the bell pull beside the inner wall and rang once. No hurry in the motion, no wasted movement. When the footman entered, Ashcombe did not turn his head. Writing case, fresh sand, and send Mr. Bell from the steward's office. The young man bowed and vanished. The door shut. The soprano below gave way to lower strings, the sound rolling up through the velvet and gilt like distant weather. Caroline stood at the rail and forced her breathing to match the tempo. She could feel her father's signet through the fabric where she had hidden it, a hard circle against her skin, proof and accusation and inheritance all at once. What did you intercept besides the note? She asked. Ashcombe reached into the inner pocket of his coat and withdrew a flat packet tied with dark thread. Not sealed now. Opened cleanly at the edge. He set it on the small inlaid table between two chairs. Copies, he said. Mr. Vane carries originals elsewhere. These were enough. Caroline untied the thread with fingers that had gone stiff from cold and fear and hunger, though she showed none of it in her face. The first sheet held her name in a clerk's neat hand, spelled correctly for once, which made it worse. Miss Caroline Brigid O'Brien. A statement of willing intent. A proposed marriage settlement to a widower she had never met. Title uncertain. Estate in Yorkshire. Debts consolidated through immediate transfer of rights currently held in trust. Her trust. Her father's last attempt to keep one portion of his estate beyond predatory hands. She turned the page. The date sat 3 days prior. She had been in the laundry yard that morning with cracked knuckles and no breakfast. Her jaw tightened. She turned the next page. A second instrument. Not her name. Miss Eleanor Gray, minor ward, aged 15, beneficiary of a small annuity under the O'Brien Residual Trust. Guardian of record. Lady Honoria O'Brien. Caroline read the clause twice. On first reading, it looked procedural. A housekeeping revision to streamline distributions. On second reading, it was theft. The annuity would be absorbed into marital debt service on Caroline's fabricated settlement and rendered unrecoverable once dispersed. Eleanor Gray. A child she had never seen. A name from the back pages of ledgers her father once locked at night. The room seemed to constrict around that one line. Ashcombe watched her read. He gave no explanation, no sympathy, only attention. You may draft for yourself first, he said. It is sufficient for tonight. Caroline lifted her eyes slowly. Sufficient for me. A flicker crossed his face, almost too brief to name. For survival, yes. For convenience also. She set both pages flat, smoothing creases with her palm. If I strike only my own instrument, Lady O'Brien will call it a misunderstanding and complete the rest by morning. The child's annuity will vanish before noon. His voice remained even. You do not know the child. I know the clause. A knock sounded. The footman returned with a portable writing slope, 2 quills, a stoppered bottle, blotting paper, and a silver dish of clean sand. Behind him came Mr. Bell, the opera steward, grey-haired and narrow-shouldered, his expression already strained by corridor rumour. Ashcombe spoke first. Shut the door, no one enters unless I permit it. Mr. Bell swallowed. Yes, my lord. Bring me 2 witnesses of unimpeached standing. One legal, if available. Quietly. Mr. Bell hesitated only an instant. Sir Matthew Keene is present tonight, my lord. King's Counsel, box 14. Fetch him. The steward bowed and withdrew. The footman followed, leaving the writing slope open on the table like a small wooden altar. Caroline removed her torn glove and took up the quill. The cut at her thumb had reopened from the damp. A thin line of red welled, and she pressed it to her skirt without comment. Then she began. Her hand shook on the first line and steadied by the third. I, Miss Caroline Bridget O'Brien, of lawful age, being presently within the Royal Opera House, and in full possession of mind and memory, do declare before witnesses that no consent to marriage, settlement, assignment, conveyance, or transfer has been given by me, whether orally, in writing, or by proxy, to any party whatsoever, this night or prior nights, represented as mine. She paused only to shake excess ink from the nib. I further declare that any instrument bearing my name and date predating this present declaration is fabricated and void for fraud, undue influence, and absence of witness by my free presence. Below, applause broke sharply, then ceased. The tenor had entered. By the time his first aria reached the second refrain, Caroline had filled one sheet and begun a second. Ashcombe remained by the door at first. Then, at some point she did not mark, he moved behind her shoulder where the lamplight caught the scar along his jaw in pale relief. He did not speak. His stillness changed the air more than pacing would have done. She continued writing. I further request immediate preservation and review of all associated schedules and annexes connected to said fabricated instrument, including but not limited to annuities, wards portions, and residual trust disbursements presently under the declared guardianship of Lady Honoria O'Brien. The quill scratched. Her wrist ached. She did not slow. Name specifically Miss Eleanor Gray, minor, whose annuity appears improperly attached to debt service in draft papers, this evening observed. Ashcombe's voice came low, close enough that she felt it at her temple. You are naming a claim that complicates your own. Yes. You may lose speed. I will not lose the record. He said nothing after that. A second knock. Mr. Bell reappeared with Sir Matthew Keene, a man in his 50s with severe brows and a face made for scepticism. A lady in dark blue silk entered behind him, announced by Mr. Bell as Lady Rotham, widow of a judge and member of 3 charitable boards that took a particular interest in wards and inheritances. Both looked from Ashcombe to Caroline to the scattered papers and understood, within a breath, that they had been summoned into scandal. Sir Matthew inclined his head to Caroline, precise and formal. Miss O'Brien, I am told you require witness. I require witness and immediate acknowledgement of attempted forgery, she said. I ask that you read what I have written before I sign. He accepted the pages. Lady Rotham stepped closer, gloved hands folded, eyes keen and unsentimental. Ashcombe remained silent, which in a room of titled men was a form of permission more potent than speech. Sir Matthew read with increasing attention. At the line naming Eleanor Gray, one brow rose. He set the first sheet down and reached for the copied instrument Caroline had opened from Ashcombe's packet. His gaze sharpened on the date. This is incompetent work, he murmured, or hurried. Both, Caroline said. Lady Rotham looked at her directly. Do you understand the consequence of naming a minor's portion in this declaration? Yes, my lady. You invite a broader inquiry. Your household will not forgive it. My household has not forgiven my breathing in years. The older woman's mouth moved, not quite a smile, not mockery either. Appraisal. Then she nodded once. Proceed. Caroline signed at the bottom with deliberate strokes that did not disguise the tremor in her fingers. Sir Matthew signed beneath as witness. Lady Wrotham added her name below his, hand elegant and firm. Mr. Bell witnessed receipt and time. Ashcombe stepped forward at last and set his signet beside the names, not as witness to her statement, but as certifying custodian of the copied packet pending magistrate review. The door rattled once from outside, abrupt and hard. Mr. Bell flinched. A woman's voice carried through the panel, bright with social composure, stretched thin. "My Lord Ashcombe, Lady O'Brien requests immediate audience with her stepdaughter. This interruption has gone far enough." Caroline recognised the maid who served Julia, sent as messenger to preserve appearances. Ashcombe did not raise his voice. "No!" A pause, then sharper. "Lady O'Brien insists." "Then Lady O'Brien may continue to insist." Silence followed, then retreating steps. Caroline released a breath she had not known she was holding. Sir Matthew tapped the forged page with one finger. "If this circulated beyond draft form, there are at least 3 actionable offences: coercion, fraudulent representation, attempted diversion of a ward's annuity." He looked at Caroline. "Have you any additional evidence?" She reached into her bodice and drew out the folded warning, and, after a fractional hesitation, her father's ring. She placed both on the table. The counsel unfolded the scrap and read, "Hand unfamiliar to me." "To me as well," Caroline said, "but true in content." Lady Wrotham's gaze settled on the ring. "O'Brien crest," she said softly. "Your father's?" "Yes. Reported stolen, if rumour served." "Many things were reported convenient." Ashcombe's head turned a fraction toward her. Not surprise now. Recognition, perhaps, of the steel she kept, banked under obedience. Mr. Bell cleared his throat. "My lord, there is commotion in the lower east corridor. 2 gentlemen requesting entry under claim of family business." "Describe them." "Dark coats, no decorations. One with a ledger." Caroline felt the pulse jump in her throat. Mr. Vane's men. Ashcombe's expression did not alter. "They are not admitted. Send for the house constable. Also, dispatch a runner to Bow Street with Sir Matthew's card." Sir Matthew removed a card case at once and handed one over. "Use my name, quickly." Mr. Bell departed at speed. Lady Wrotham moved to Caroline's side and, without asking, took her injured right hand, turning it gently to inspect the split thumb and the whitened knuckles from cold. Her voice lowered. "You are freezing." "I am functional." "That was not my question." "I know." The older woman released her hand. "You have done the correct thing, Miss O'Brien." "Correct is rarely kind to the nerves." Caroline inclined her head, unable to answer for a moment. Hunger and adrenaline had begun to trade places in her body, leaving a thin, trembling clarity. Ashcombe poured water from a carafe into a crystal glass and set it within reach of her hand. Command disguised as placement. She took it and drank because refusal would waste time they did not have. Another knock. Not pounding this time. Mr. Bell returned with a uniformed house constable and, unexpectedly, a girl in a plain cloak who could not have been more than 15, her bonnet askew, eyes wide and rimmed red, as if she had been crying in private and ordered to stop. Behind her stood an older nursemaid, rigid with fear. Mr. Bell spoke too quickly. "My lord, this young lady was being removed through the service stair by a clerk carrying papers in Lady O'Brien's name. The constable challenged them. The clerk fled." Caroline stared at the girl. Pale face, ink smudge on one cuff, posture trained toward apology. The constable held up a half-crumpled paper recovered in the corridor. "Authorization for transfer of ward to temporary guardian, unsigned at witness line." Sir Matthew took it, scanned the heading, and swore under his breath in language brief and parliamentary. Lady Wrotham crossed to the girl at once. "Your name, child?" Eleanor Grey, my lady. Her voice shook once and steadied. I was told I must come quietly to avoid distressing Miss O'Brien. Caroline closed her eyes for half a beat. When she opened them, she looked at Eleanor, not at Ashcombe, not at the papers. You were told falsely, she said. Come here. Eleanor obeyed on instinct, crossing the room in 2 small, uncertain steps. Caroline drew one of the upholstered chairs nearer the fire grate and guided the girl into it, then loosened the wet ribbon under her chin. A simple motion, practical, the kind an elder sister might make without being thanked. The nursemaid began to speak and faltered. I did not know, miss. They had seals. They said Lady O'Brien commanded... You kept her with you, Caroline said. That was enough. From the corner of her eye she saw Ashcombe watching this exchange with a stillness almost severe, as if he had expected calculation and found something else that unsettled him more. Sir Matthew laid Caroline's declaration beside the recovered transfer paper and tapped Eleanor's name on both. This is now incontrovertible pattern. We proceed immediately. Lady Wrotham drew herself up to full height. The girl remains with me until formal orders are issued. Miss O'Brien, if you consent, I will state publicly that you raised the alarm and named the ward before recovery. It will matter. Caroline looked at Eleanor's small hands, clenched in her lap. State it! Ashcombe spoke then, each word clipped and final. Mr. Bell, assemble 3 additional witnesses from among title patrons with no known ties to the O'Brien household. Bring them now. Yes, my lord. As the steward hurried away, the opera below surged toward its final ensemble. Brass entered, drums beneath it. In the corridor outside, steps gathered, retreated, returned. London had scented scandal and moved toward it in silk and polished boots. Caroline gathered the signed pages into ordered stacks. Original declaration, witness signatures, copied forged instrument, recovered transfer slip naming Eleanor. Warning note? She sanded the fresh ink and blew gently across each sheet until it dulled. Then she wrapped the bundle in blotting paper and tied it with the same dark thread Ashcombe had used for the intercepted packet. She held the bundle out to Sir Matthew. For custody, she said, recorded as received in this room at this hour in the presence of named witnesses. He accepted it with formal gravity. Recorded. Only then did she sit, not from weakness, but because her knees had begun a faint, involuntary tremor that she refused to display standing. Eleanor glanced at her, frightened and trying not to be. Caroline reached across the small distance and took the girl's hand once, briefly, then let go. Ashcombe stood opposite them, broad shoulders cutting the lamplight, expression unreadable except for one small detail she would remember later. His right hand, usually still as carved stone, flexed once at his side and stilled again. Outside the door, Lady O'Brien's voice rose at last, stripped of its polished veneer. Open this door. No one moved to obey. Lady O'Brien struck the door panel again from the corridor, the blow flat and furious, and the latch gave a small metallic cry that seemed far too thin for the force behind it. Ashcombe turned his head toward the constable without taking his eyes from the door. You will hold that passage, he said. No one enters without my order. If Lady O'Brien wishes audience, she may wait with the others. The constable touched 2 fingers to his hat brim. Yes, my lord. He stepped into the corridor and pulled the door nearly shut behind him, leaving it open only an inch. Through that narrow seam came the hiss of silk, the clipped rise of Lady O'Brien's voice, and then the deeper murmur of male voices arriving to witness whatever London would call this by midnight. Caroline kept her gaze on the table. Ink, sand, blotter, the tied packet now in Sir Matthew's hand. Eleanor in the chair by the grate, knees together, fingers twisted in her plain cloak. Lady Wrotham standing at the girl's shoulder like an iron post wrapped in blue silk. Every object had become evidence merely by remaining where it was. The door seam widened. Mr. Bell returned first, pale but composed, followed by 3 patrons summoned as neutral witnesses. Lord Fenton, old enough to have buried ambition, Mrs. Hailwick, rich, widowed and exact, and Reverend Pike, whose charity sermons were famous for offending donors by naming them. They entered with the reluctant gravity of people who knew they were stepping into a legal chamber disguised as an opera box. Lady O'Brien came behind them before the constable could stop her, rose silk, pearls at her throat, fan closed now and held like a blade. Her smile was gone. "Caroline," she said, and the name came out as possession, not affection. "Stand up. You have made a spectacle of us." Ashcombe did not move from where he stood between Caroline and the door. "She remains seated." Lady O'Brien gave a short breath of disbelief. "My lord, this is a family matter." Sir Matthew answered before Caroline could. "Not any longer, Lady O'Brien." The older woman turned toward him with instant social polish returning by force. "Sir Matthew, then, you can certainly explain why my stepdaughter has been encouraged into delusion by men who mistake gossip for law." "Your difficulty," Sir Matthew said, "is that law has now been written in this room, signed and witnessed." A flush climbed her throat and stopped at the jawline. "By coercion." Caroline rose then, slowly, because she would not have the word hang unanswered. Hunger dragged at her spine and the wet hem chilled her calves, but her voice came clear. "No one coerced me to read my own name on forged paper." Lady O'Brien shifted her eyes to Caroline's face. For one moment the mask dropped completely. Hate made her look older than powder could conceal. "You ungrateful girl," she said softly, "after all I have managed for you." Caroline's cheek, the one struck earlier, burned again, as if memory had heat. She held Lady O'Brien's gaze. "You managed me," she said, "not for me." The room held still. Even the music below, rising toward a chorus, sounded distant now, as if heard through snow. Ashcombe spoke into that stillness. "Lady O'Brien, you will lower your voice. You will address Miss O'Brien by her name. You will remain 3 steps from her person." Lady O'Brien's laugh broke at the edges. "You issue household commands in my presence?" "I issue protective commands in mine." She looked at him then, fully and calculated. Caroline could see the arithmetic move behind her eyes. Rank, scandal, possible allies, newspapers. She pivoted at once. "My lord, if your concern is propriety, you may rest easy. Caroline is overtired and prone to dramatics when hungry. I have repeatedly asked that she be brought home." Lady Wrotham's brows rose 1 degree. "Hungry?" Lady O'Brien smiled at her. "She neglects her meals when she is peevish." Caroline did not speak. She did not need to. Ashcombe did. "She has eaten 1 crust since noon," he said. "In the back passage, standing." Every head turned toward him. He continued, voice level, each fact placed like a stone. "She was struck at the carriage step at 7:20 past. Right cheek, open hand, witnessed by Penrith's coachman and 2 footmen. She has been kept in a wet police for 3 hours while your daughters sat in heated rooms. Her gloves were mended twice and split through at both thumbs. You sent her to the side corridor at second interval where Vane's men were waiting." He paused. His eyes remained on Lady O'Brien, but Caroline felt each word land against her skin as if he had touched the bruises one by one. "You will not call her dramatic again." Silence answered him. Not polite silence, shocked silence. Caroline could not look at him immediately. The inventory he had spoken was too exact, too intimate in its precision. She had been watched, measured, and named in details no one else had considered worth seeing. Shame rose first by habit, then something fiercer moved through it and broke it apart. Relief, unwanted and undeniable, left her unsteady. Lady O'Brien found her voice by force. "You presume far beyond your place, my lord." Ashcombe's expression did not alter. "My place is precisely the point." By the time the final act bell rang below, sharp and urgent through the walls, the corridor outside had filled with curious patrons and staff held back by the constable. Rain struck the high panes in an even, hard rhythm. No one in the box seemed to breathe at the same pace. Sir Matthew stepped nearer the table, papers in hand. "Lady O'Brien," he said, "you may answer now whether this draft settlement bearing Miss O'Brien's name was prepared under your instruction." He held up the copied sheet. Eleanor's name showed on the second page where Caroline had marked the line in ink. Lady O'Brien glanced at it and looked away too quickly. "I do not recognise scraps passed from hand to hand by men with grievances." Sir Matthew held up the recovered transfer slip next. "And this order removing Miss Eleanor Grey through a service stair. I authorise temporary lodging for the girl's comfort." Eleanor made a small sound by the grate and went white. Caroline moved toward her without asking permission. She put one hand on the chair back, steadying both of them. Lady Wrotham spoke, each word clipped. "Without witness, at night, through a servant door." Mrs. Hallowick, who had been silent until now, stepped forward and peered at the slip through a lorgnette. "This signature line is blank," she said. "That is not temporary lodging. That is attempted disappearance with ink." Reverend Pike nodded once. "Amen to that." Lady O'Brien's fan snapped open, then shut again. "This is absurd theatre." "No," Caroline said. "This is the first honest stage I have stood upon in years." The words surprised even her, but once spoken they steadied her. Sir Matthew opened the tied packet Caroline had already organised and submitted, withdrew a folded evidence square, and set her father's signet ring on the table beside the marked pages without relinquishing custody. "This was reported stolen after probate," she said. "It appears tonight inside papers, forging my consent. If you wish to call this theatre, then someone has paid dearly for props." Lord Fenton leaned closer, old eyes suddenly keen. "That is indeed O'Brien's old seal." Sir Matthew made a brief notation, lifted the ring so all witnesses could view the worn crest in full lamplight, then held it out for Caroline's public identification. She touched the edge once with her fingertip and nodded. He returned it immediately to the evidence square and resealed it into the folio. Lady O'Brien took one step forward. Ashcombe matched it with a step of his own, not touching her, simply occupying the space she intended to cross. The effect was absolute. "You will remain where you are," he said. Her nostrils flared. "You cannot bar me from my own stepdaughter." "I can, and I do." It was not loud. It did not need to be. Caroline looked at his profile, the scar pale in lamplight, the jaw locked as if braced against impact. He did not glance back to see whether she approved. He did not soften the command for company. He stood there as if the world ended at his shoulders, and she was on the side that must not be reached. The crack ran through the room in that moment, clean and permanent. Everyone felt it. The old arrangement had depended on Caroline being movable, deniable, unclaimed in public. Ashcombe had made a public boundary around her body with one sentence, and boundaries spoken before witnesses became facts no apology could erase. Sir Matthew drew breath to speak, but Ashcombe lifted a hand fractionally. "One matter first," he said. He turned to Caroline. The rest of the room fell away from her awareness, though she could still hear rain, music, and Eleanor's uneven breathing. Ashcombe's gaze was direct, severe, and stripped of ornament. "I filed a provisional petition at Chancery this afternoon," he said. "Fraud watch on any instrument bearing your name until personal appearance before magistrate. It is sealed under my surety." Caroline stared at him. "You did what?" "I expected an attempt tonight. I prepared for it." "Without asking me?" "Yes." Her pulse jumped hard at her throat. Anger came up, sharp and righteous. So did gratitude. The two did not blend. They collided. "You had no right," she said. "I had no time." The room listened. No one interrupted. He went on, voice unchanged, and that steadiness made the words heavier. "If I had asked, you would have refused aid purchased by obligation. If I had delayed for your permission, you would now be in a carriage with 2 paid witnesses and a forged future. I chose the offence you could survive." Caroline's hands trembled once and stilled. He had read her accurately enough to infuriate her, and accurately enough to save her. The knowledge sat in her chest like a stone dropped into deep water, ripples reaching places she had kept guarded even from herself. Sir Matthew exhaled softly. "That petition, if genuine, is decisive." "It is genuine," Ashcombe said. "My clerk carries a duplicate to Bow Street now." Lady O'Brien's composure cracked at last. "You conspired against my household." "No," Ashcombe said. "I conspired against fraud." She turned to Caroline in sudden desperation, sharpened as tenderness. "Child, listen to me. He will own your name if you let him do this." Caroline answered before fear could re-enter her bones. "My name was already being sold." Lady O'Brien opened her mouth, closed it. The fan in her hand shook. At the door, the constable reappeared with 2 Bow Street officers in dark coats, wet from rain. Their boots marked water on the carpet. One carried a leather folio case, the other a written order already folded for use. "Sir Matthew Keene?" the first officer asked. Sir Matthew stepped forward and presented the packet Caroline had tied, then indicated the copied settlement and transfer slip on the table. "Evidence preserved, witnesses present, alleged party identified." The officer nodded and looked to Lady O'Brien with professional neutrality that felt somehow colder than contempt. "Lady Honoria O'Brien, you are requested to accompany us for formal inquiry into suspected forgery, coercive procurement, and attempted unlawful transfer of a minor ward." "Requested?" she repeated faintly. "For now, madam." Lady O'Brien turned in a quick circle of appeal, searching for rescue in faces that had already shifted away. Society did not defend scandal when the paperwork was this clean. She found Caroline last. "Caroline, tell them this is confusion." Caroline held her gaze. She did not lower hers. She did not whisper. "It is clarity," she said. The officers did not take Lady O'Brien by force. They did not need to. They waited until she gathered her skirts with shaking hands and moved toward the door under the eyes of witnesses who had just watched rank fail to overrule record. At the threshold she stopped and looked back once, not at Caroline, but at Ashcombe, as if trying to memorize the face of the man who had ruined her design. "You will regret this interference," she said. He answered with a quiet that cut deeper than anger. "I do not regret accuracy." She left. The door closed. The latch settled. For the first time in hours, no one demanded that Caroline move. Sound rushed back in layers. Rain at glass. Orchestra below in full ensemble. Murmurs in the corridor rising, then fading as gossip found new hallways. Eleanor's breath, slower now, the scrape of Sir Matthew's pen as he noted time of removal. Lady Wrotham instructing the nursemaid in low practical tones, Mr. Bell dispatching staff with unusual authority. Caroline remained standing where she was, one hand on Eleanor's chair, knees threatening treachery. Ashcombe did not step away. He also did not touch her. He stood an arm's length off, as still as stone set in river current. After a moment he spoke, but only to her. "You will eat before you travel." It sounded like command. It was shelter. She looked at him then, fully this time. The severity in his face had not softened. The scar still drew a hard, pale line to his left jaw, but his right hand at his side had resumed that involuntary flex and release, as if control itself had a cost tonight. "I do not take orders well," she said, voice roughened by exhaustion. "Learn selectively." The corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile. Mr. Bell returned with a tray at that instant, as if the command had already been obeyed before speech finished. Broth, bread, a small plate of cold chicken, and tea strong enough to wake the dead. Caroline sat because standing had become wasteful. Eleanor watched her until Caroline lifted the spoon and swallowed once. Only then did the girl accept a cup from Lady Wrotham and drink in tiny, careful sips. Sir Matthew closed his folio. "Miss O'Brien, the magistrate will require your statement tonight while details are fresh." "I will give it," Ashcombe answered before anyone else could object to the hour. "She will give it from my carriage under escort and not alone." Another command, another boundary laid in place where danger had been. Caroline set down the spoon. "My lord," he met her gaze. "That petition you filed," she said, "you presumed." "Yes, and you were right." He inclined his head once, no triumph in it. The memory of her father's ring, warm in lamplight when she had identified it before witnesses and watched it resealed into evidence, steadied her as she rose. "Then hear me clearly," she said. "I will not be hidden again, not in your name." "Not in any name." His answer came at once. "Good." He opened the door and stood aside, not leading, not dragging, simply making a visible path through the corridor where everyone could see her walk it. Caroline stepped through first. The corridor had become a gallery of faces, silk and black coats and opera glasses lowered too late to feign innocence, and she felt the old reflex to fold inward rise and fail in the same breath because Sir Matthew walked at her right shoulder with the folio under his arm. Lady Wrotham kept Eleanor close at her left, and Ashcombe followed half a pace behind with the constable and 2 Bow Street officers bracketing the group in plain view. No one could call her unattended now. No one could call her missing. Mr. Vane stood near the marble column where Lady O'Brien had been, hat in his hands, composure gone slack around the mouth. The black enamel boar crest on his signet caught the corridor gaslight exactly once before an officer stepped toward him. "Mr. Vane," Sir Matthew said, voice carrying cleanly. "You will remain." Vane gave a short bow to no one in particular. "I am merely an agent." "Then you may explain your agency to the magistrate," Sir Matthew replied. Caroline saw his eyes flick to Ashcombe, and then to the folio case. Calculation, then surrender. He did not run. At the base of the private stair, Mr. Bell met them with a clerk from the house office, a narrow man with ink on both cuffs and fear in both eyes. Caroline recognised him from earlier weeks, the one who stamped cards without meeting her gaze. He looked at the floor until Sir Matthew addressed him by name. "Mr. Hobb, you received packet traffic for Lady O'Brien tonight?" Hobb swallowed. "Yes, sir." "From whom?" He darted one look toward Vane. "From Vane's man. I logged 1 sealed packet at second interval, and 1 verbal instruction for side stair clearance." "Did you mark the instruction?" "No, sir. No written order was produced." His voice thinned. "I should have refused." Sir Matthew nodded once. "You will make that statement in writing before we leave this building." The first callback came before they reached the vestibule. A soaked runner in Ashcombe livery pushed through the crowd, breath smoking in the cold draught from the main doors. He bowed to Ashcombe and held out a folded paper sealed in dark wax. "From Chancery Clerk, my lord. Duplicate petition filed and entered. Time stamped 9:43. Ashcombe passed it directly to Sir Matthew without breaking seal. Sir Matthew opened, scanned, then read aloud for witnesses nearest enough to hear. "Provisional fraud watch entered against all instruments bearing the name Miss Caroline Bridget O'Brien, pending personal appearance and attested consent before magistrate by surety of the Earl of Ashcombe." Mrs. Hallowick, who had followed this far out of fierce civic appetite, gave a tight nod. "Entered before the attempted removal, then." "By nearly an hour," Sir Matthew said. Caroline exhaled slowly. Anger at his presumption remained, but uncertainty about whether he had spoken truth did not. Outside, rain came down in a hard silver curtain. Footmen held lanterns high. Carriages rocked and steamed at the line. Ashcombe's carriage waited nearest the side gate, crest visible, lamps lit, door already opened. He did not touch her as she mounted, but his hand remained near her elbow in case the wet step betrayed her. It did not. Inside, Sir Matthew took the forward seat with the folio on his knees. Lady Wrotham settled Eleanor and the nursemaid opposite Caroline, and wrapped an extra wool lap robe over both their legs. Ashcombe entered last, and gave one instruction through the window slit. "Bow Street, then Chancery receiving desk." The carriage lurched into motion. For 3 streets no one spoke above the rain. London rolled past in blurred gaslight and black water. Caroline pressed her fingertips into the seat seam to stop their tremor, and failed. Then Eleanor, silent and pale beside Lady Wrotham, reached across and put her own small hand over Caroline's knuckles. The gesture was timid, practical, and steadying. Caroline turned her hand and held it once, firmly. At Bow Street they were taken through the side entrance, not the public room. A coal fire snapped in the magistrate's chamber. Wet wool and ink and old wood made a sharper air than the opera's perfume haze. The magistrate on duty, Mr. Armitage, looked annoyed until Sir Matthew laid the packet out by order. Declaration, forged draft, transfer slip, warning note, petition duplicate, witness list. Annoyance gave way to professional concentration within 2 pages. He looked up at Caroline. "You are prepared to affirm this statement now?" "I am." "Read the central paragraph in your own voice." She did, every word clear despite fatigue scraping her throat. At the line naming Eleanor Gray's annuity, the magistrate's pen stopped and resumed with heavier strokes. He questioned each witness in turn. "Sir Matthew, Lady Wrotham." Lord Fenton summoned from his waiting carriage and grumbling only about stairs. Not duty. Met a bell. Met a hob. Shaking but precise after Sir Matthew's warning. The constable, the Bow Street officer who intercepted Eleanor's transfer. Each testimony aligned on times, locations, names. Then Mr. Vane was brought in. He tried polished caution first. "I carried drafts only, no final instrument." Mr. Armitage did not look up from the page. "Who commissioned the drafts?" "Lady O'Brien's household." "Who instructed side stair witnesses?" Vane hesitated. Sir Matthew spoke into the pause. "He can answer now or under charge." Vane closed his eyes once. "Lady O'Brien instructed urgency. She said the girl would resist for sentimental reasons and must be spared public upset." "What fee?" the magistrate asked. Vane named it. Too high for clerical work, high enough to sound like disappearance. By midnight, Formal orders were written and sanded dry. Lady O'Brien held for inquiry. Mr. Vane bound to appear. Immediate injunction against any transfer from O'Brien Residual Trust. Temporary ward protection for Eleanor Gray under Lady Rotham pending court review. Independent counsel appointed to Caroline from the court list at her request, not Ashcombe's. When the clerk pushed the counsel list across the desk, Caroline read every name, asked one question about prior debt litigation, and selected Mr. Elias Finch, son of her father's old clerk. The magistrate raised a brow. "You know his work." "I know his father's honesty." "Good enough for tonight." One by one, physical items were logged into custody. The warning note in unfamiliar hand was tagged as anonymous alert, origin unknown. The forged settlement copies and transfer slip were entered for handwriting comparison against Lady O'Brien's household clerking books. Mr. Vane's Boarcrest seal was impressed in wax for record. Caroline's father's signet ring drew a longer pause. Mr. Armitage held it in lamplight. "Claimed by you as family property?" "Yes." "Contested by anyone present?" No one spoke. He nodded to the evidence clerk. "Ring to remain sealed through morning inventory, then released to Miss O'Brien upon receipt signature if no rival claim is filed by noon." Caroline inclined her head. "I will sign in person." Ashcombe had stood through all of it, mostly silent, answering only when directly addressed. The magistrate turned to him at last. "My lord, your surety remains until her personal appearance at Chancery hearing. You understand obligations?" "I do." "You also understand Miss O'Brien now acts under independent counsel, not your household." His answer came without pause. "As she should." By the time they stepped back into the rain, the hour had gone late, enough that even London's appetite for spectacle had thinned. The storm had eased to a fine, cold drizzle. Eleanor and the nursemaid left in Lady Rotham's carriage with a written protection in hand, and 2 officers riding behind. Lady Rotham took Caroline's hand at the curb, squeezed once, and released. "You spoke like a barrister," she said. "Do not let anyone train that out of you." Sir Matthew climbed into his own carriage with the folio case secured under lock-strap. Before the door shut, he looked back at Caroline. 2 days hence, 10 o'clock, Chancery preliminary. Be exact. The court forgives sin sooner than lateness." "I will be there," she said. He gave a grunt that served as approval and vanished into rain. Only Ashcombe's carriage remained by the lamp. Caroline stood under the awning, wet hem heavy against her boots, exhaustion settling into her bones now that movement had stopped. Ashcombe came to stand beside her, close enough for shared shelter, not close enough to presume. For a long moment they watched the rain strike the cobbles, where carriage wheels had cut dark arcs through light. Then he drew something from his inner pocket, the pearl-grey glove. "The clerk returned this from the table at Bow Street," he said. "It was logged as incidental, not evidence." Caroline looked at it in his hand. The glove that was never hers and had carried warning, ring, and choice. "It began as a lie," she said. "It carried truth." He held it out. She took it. The kid leather was damp now at the fingertips where her own wet hands touched it. "Keep it," he said. "As what?" "As record." She folded it once and slipped it into her reticule beside the magistrate's copy receipt. "Then it remains mine by use, if not by origin." A flicker at his mouth, not quite a smile. "Accepted." The next morning happened without the protection of darkness. In the magistrate's evidence office, Caroline signed for her father's ring at a scarred oak desk, while 2 clerks watched the formalities. She checked the crest, the worn edge, the quartered knotwork, then placed it on her own finger. It fit tighter than memory, but it fit. Mr. Hobbs' written admission had been filed. The side stair witnesses, paid by Vane had been identified. One spoke, one refused, and was noted as refusal on record. The unknown hand that wrote the warning note remained unknown. The register marked it plainly. Source not yet established. No thread was hidden behind polite language. By noon, printed notices had begun to circulate in coffee houses and drawing rooms alike. Lady O'Brien's name appeared beside the word inquiry. Mr. Vane's appeared beside procurement. Caroline's appeared as complainant and beneficiary under restored trust review. Poor relation did not appear at all. At dusk she returned to the Opera House one final time, not for performance but for the property office where lost items and recovered parcels were held. Mr. Bell met her with unusual ceremony and produced her old mended gloves, the pair she had left behind in Ashcombe's box when the officers arrived. She took them, then surprised herself by laughing once, very softly, at the sight of the split thumbs. "They are beyond repair," Mr. Bell said apologetically. "They have already done their work," she answered. Outside, Ashcombe's carriage waited, door open, horses quiet in the rain-cooled air. He stood by the step in dark coat and gloves, unreadable as ever. "You may ride with me," he said, "or not. Your address is yours to name." Caroline looked up at him, then down at the ring on her hand, then at the street where she had once been ordered to walk home alone as instruction in economy. She lifted her chin. "Gray's Inn Road first," she said. "To Mr. Finch's office. I signed the council retainer tonight." "Done." She placed one foot on the carriage step, paused, and met his eyes fully. "I go because I choose it." His answer was immediate and unornamented. "I know." She entered. He followed. The door closed on rain, and when the carriage moved, it carried her forward under her own name,